Dr. Louise Nasmith is a family physician and academic. She has been chair of the Department of Family Medicine at McGill University and later the chair of the Department of Family and Community Medicine at the University of Toronto. She has been very active in the College of Family Physicians in Canada for over 20 years, culminating in a term as president. In June 2007, she assumed the role of principal of the College of Health Disciplines at the University of British Columbia. She has been a leader in national projects for Health Canada and the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences addressing the challenges of chronic illness. For the last decade, she has been working with educators, practitioners, health authorities, and the government to advance collaborative practice and interprofessional education in various jurisdictions within Canada.
It would be fair to say that I pretty well stumbled into leadership positions, which maybe not that different from a number of physician leaders who are asked to take on different things and you just do, and then before you know it, it leads to one thing. So I am a family physician. I, at one point, and I think it's worth just quickly describing how I got to where I am by saying that I was working at a small community hospital where we were teaching residents, family medicine residents, etc. And one of my colleagues who had been responsible for the students in our hospital, in the family medicine center, was moving. And I suddenly thought, jeepers, you know, I think I'd like to ask if maybe I could take that role on, because I'm not getting bored, but I sort of would like to challenge myself a little bit more. And I went to our unit director and said, you know, would you consider me for this? And she said, sure, we'd love you to do it. Now that was not necessarily a true leadership role, but it got me hooked into medical education, which then led to my being responsible for the residents in our local program, then led me to apply for the postgraduate program director job at McGill for family medicine that I did get. And then before I knew it, I was on the search committee for the chair of the department, and one person at that committee said, why don't you apply? And I went, I've never thought of being a chair. But I said, well, if you think I could do it, then maybe I'll apply. And then before you know it, I got that job. And then before you know it, I was asked if I would apply for the chair's position at the University of Toronto. And I did, and I got that job and did that for 5 years. And then John Gilbert said, would you think of applying for the principal of the College of Health Disciplines job? So I said, oh, okay. And so truly, it was just a matter of a few doors opening and being kind of interested and peeking and deciding, yeah. And that's how I got into leadership, so-called leadership positions. It wasn't by great design that I saw myself ever doing this. When I look at colleagues whom I think have a potential for leadership, and they struggle with that, right? Because they know that they can't do it all full time. And for me, it wasn't that difficult. I still have a clinical role. I've never given it up, and I don't really want to, but it's very limited now. So slowly but surely, my clinical role became less a part of my everyday work. And there are choices that you have to make, but I don't think they're black and white. I think somehow some people think it's all or none, and I really don't think it has to be that way. I have a profession, or I have a discipline that allows me to do things part-time, right, or to do the clinical work part-time. It might be a lot more difficult if you're a surgeon, and yet the Dean of Medicine still does clinical work in a very limited capacity. I think part of it, Brenda, has to do with when you start backing off on clinical. And probably some of the difficulty with our young leaders is that they're probably asked to back off too quickly when their clinical identities aren't really solid. I do 2 half days now, and I feel very comfortable. I know that I don't know everything, but I know I can look it up. I'm very, very comfortable in my clinical work. So I think part of it has to do with the timing of when you really start ramping one down and ramping the other one up. And I'm not sure we actually quite understand that and allow that transition to take place. I think we push young people maybe too quickly into having to make that decision. I think my credibility as a healthcare leader is in part because I still am a practicing physician. And I can see that. I can really compare it to other people who aren't in the same sort of, or don't have necessarily the clinical experience that I've had, that have more difficulty with credibility with their colleagues or their clinical colleagues as well. So, I mean, that's a long way of saying that I think that the transition has been fine. I think I've been able to always strike a balance and not feel that I'm incompetent in any one of those domains, right? Which is really important. And somehow, but I've always been very conscious of it, so I've thought it through, and I've timed it in a way that I think it's been okay. And I don't think anybody has necessarily suffered as a result, including myself. Well, I think I was always surprised that I really liked it. I actually like administration. I like organizational charts. I like sort of trying to figure out how to do things. I think I was also surprised to what extent my skills as a family physician and my skills as an educator, because I think I sort of defined myself as a clinician and an educator before I would have as a leader, were skills that were transferable, totally transferable. Because listening, being able to try and understand what other people are thinking, understanding them, and later on I know you talk about relationships, which are really critical, and relationships are foundational to family practice. The ability to lead small groups in education, well, it's the same skills you use in running a meeting, right? They're no different. Small group teaching and running a meeting, identical, really. So a lot of those are very transferable skills, and I didn't necessarily feel that I had to go off and take some Harvard course on being a leader. I kind of just learned it on the job and transferred much of what I was doing in other realms to that, and it worked. And I didn't necessarily feel inadequate. And you know, accounting or the budgets and spreadsheets, eventually I just had people around me who could teach me how to do it. So I've never really taken a leadership course. I've given a few leadership seminars, you know, and I learned about it by reading up on it as well. So I think those were some of the surprises, that it wasn't this big magical world that I had to learn all about and feel that I didn't know what I was doing. I just kind of, it happened. The unique challenges of being a physician leader is that we really have to juggle stuff. Probably more than, every leader has to juggle a bunch of things, but the juggling for us is the juggling between what we said earlier, the clinical world, the world of caring for patients, and then in my case it was also the educating young physicians and being able to really help and deal with them. And then I'd suddenly move into being, you know, administering a department or what have you. Those are three almost separate domains. The first two cross over, the other one is related to, but you need to kind of go from, okay, I spent a half day seeing patients, and now I'm going into a very different kind of world of administration and dealing with X, Y, and Z. And then I might have to go back to, I'm teaching that afternoon. And at times it becomes kind of exhausting to make those shifts all the time and to be able to park stuff and move into something else, and to be able to just get into a different headspace. So I think those are some of the ones. And knowing that you can't leave a sick patient, or you can't leave worrying about a sick patient when you've got to walk into a meeting with the dean and be able to deal with all kinds of budgetary things. You know, things are happening and you're worried about them, but you have to park them. So that's tough, and these are high-stake things that you're dealing with. I think those have been the biggest challenges for me. Leading physicians, I mean, I know I've given one of the sessions that I give is all about the challenges of leading physicians. I actually find it helps, because I understand where they're coming from.
It helps what?
It helps that, no, it helps that I'm leading physicians because I understand them. It's a lot more difficult to lead. It's actually probably more challenging for me in this current job that I have interprofessionally to understand where are my nursing colleagues really coming from. I sort of get it because we're all healthcare professionals, but I know it's different and I have to figure that out, right? Whereas physicians, I know, we trained, It's the same thing. I know where you're coming from. I know the way you think. So it's not really a challenge for me. Yes, you're autonomous beings. Yes, you like to be sort of at the helm and you like to be doing this, but I get it. So I don't find that challenging. I don't find it a difficulty. There's always challenges because you deal with personalities, but I can usually get where you're coming from as a physician. So it isn't that difficult for me to lead physicians. Absolutely. It's fundamental because being an effective leader, people have to trust you. And if you don't have relationships with people, how in the world are they ever going to trust you? So building those relationships, be it with an ADM in government, or be it with somebody that is part of your department, or be it with the dean, or what have you. It's all about getting to know each other as human beings, as well as the relationship that has to grow around a particular issue or project or what have you. And I think that in part that probably is, and I don't know how you teach that. How do you teach people to be able to build effective relationships? And again, I think that part of that is coming from the fact that as a family physician, family medicine is all about the relationships you have with your patients. So it's been that the part of the job that I really like. So if you ask me what have been my successes over the years, it's the relationships that I've built. It's the trust that people have had in me, and it's being able to help people get promoted. All of those things that are all about getting to know people and building that kind of relationship. And I think that's why I enjoy this job. It's probably why I like it, because it really was about all these relationships that I actually had the opportunity and the actual joy of developing over time. Yeah, it does. And I think as a chair of a department primarily, and I think the problem, at one point I realized it's so much fun having people come and talk to you about what they want and et cetera. And I said, but nobody's doing that with me. Yeah, I get to meet the dean, but I know that the dean is really busy and the dean kind of wants to talk about budget, but it's rare in the two places where I was a chair that I'd have somebody, sort of a senior to me, saying, how are you doing? Are you having trouble? Do you need some help? Do we just talk? Can we just talk? Can I have a different kind of relationship than worrying about, so where are we going to go? I actually have it here way more because when I meet with the provost, there's often sort of like, how are you doing? And I thought, oh, how lovely. Someone actually cares. So I think that's part of the loneliness, Brenda. It's just that you give an awful lot, and you get because you give, right? But that from a standpoint of really finding really mentors, it's a lot more difficult. There isn't a social loneliness, though. Certainly the joy, again, as I said earlier, certainly when I went in both at McGill and at the University of Toronto, were the relationships that I had with my colleagues and who were, basically program directors or what have you. That was absolutely wonderful. So I never really felt lonely in that capacity, but I think in terms of my own development as a leader, it's been not necessarily that easy to find somebody that I could kind of go to and just say, help me with this. Very difficult. And I think part of it was you don't structure that. Right. I mean, I think that's the stuff that Susan Leaf has been so interested in, is saying, so who's taking care of the chairs of departments? And how do we build the development or the professional development for them when they're busy doing it for other people? And that is a gap. That's, I think, a gap. Even if I look at the deans around the table where I sit now, I don't know whether anybody, other than the one-on-one with the provost, do we collectively help each other and work with each other rather than have to sort of go back and struggle with a lot of the things that probably we could help each other. So I think that systems-wise, we could build some systems that probably would help with some of that loneliness. It's interesting. You'd think that they are diametrically opposed and that they would clash. And as I read the question, I thought, well, they actually don't. Competition's good. I think when you get two people competing and locking horns, that doesn't necessarily lead to good collaboration, because probably egos get in the way. But when you have groups competing around something, when there's an openness and a transparency about what's going on and dialogue that ultimately leads to sharing, then you can actually have people kind of competing because they want to, if I think of the family medicine units in the various programs that I led, they all kind of wanted to be number one, to get resident choice and all this stuff. And they'd all really try hard, but they talked about it and they shared with each other. They weren't holding their cards close to their chest. They weren't saying, I'm not going to tell you what we're doing. They said, we're doing this stuff and it's really neat, it's really good, and it's probably better than what you're doing, right? But that's okay. There was a camaraderie around the competition. So I think if you can set up systems where there's competition because people are kind of built that way, and you foster it, but in a way that's open, transparent, and that leads to sharing, then it becomes collaborative. In some ways, I think that for me, a real failure would be if a relationship failed. Not so much that I wasn't able to achieve something. And I don't think I've had too many failures at relationships. I probably have when the expectations between two people or between me and that person just didn't jibe, or that person really was expecting something that I couldn't give, right, and that I probably wasn't able to convey that to that person for whatever reason, be it that I didn't get it initially, or be it that I just didn't I felt that by conveying that to that person that I might be having to be too critical of that person, and I just didn't want to go there. I think that, there may be times when I can think of one particular time or situation where I probably needed to confront somebody whom I'd known for a really long time about what this person, how their role had evolved, and it was just too hard. And so I didn't, and I probably should have. So I kind of left it for the next person. So I think that would be, to me, a bigger failure than not having achieved something. And I think it's just when your own relationship with somebody actually gets in the way of being able to move on, because it's hard. So that's as far as I could go. I don't think there's anyone, because usually if we failed at something, it's collective failure. It's not my own failure. It's because whatever happened, we just couldn't do it. And usually you can figure out why. It's government decided they were going to take forever to do something, and you just sort of say, so I don't really see that as a failure. I just see that as a system that just didn't allow something to happen, and collectively we couldn't do it. Probably because I like to work with people, and it's not all about me. It really isn't. If I think people burn out when if it's just all about them, then it's so very easy to get really exhausted. And I get tired, but I get tired because I probably do too much. I think the resilience is that I really love working with people, and I love seeing people grow, and I love being able to hand things off to people and watch them and nurture them as they go through things, so that I can get fed a lot of happiness and joy in my work, because I can see really wonderful things happen to individuals around me. And that is true. I actually hadn't thought of that until just now. And I think that builds my own resilience, right? I think also I've always made it very clear that my family comes first. And that's something that no matter when the kids were growing up and I had to go to I didn't have to, I chose to go to a basketball game, and I didn't hide it. I just said, sorry, I can't do this because there's something going on. And when I really couldn't, I couldn't. And I would make it clear to my kids, I'm really sorry, but this time I can't. But I would make time but I didn't feel that I always had to not tell people. And I think what happens with leaders is that they feel they have to hide things, that my family, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, versus I have to do it because I want to do it, because my family comes first. And I've tried to convey that message to particularly young women leaders, is not to feel that you can't say, sorry, I'm a mother and it's really important for me to be here, so no, I can't be there, or I can't make a 7 a.m. meeting, sorry. So if you want me, these are my terms. And I think that has really helped. So I get great joy out of my family. And that has really, I think, helped me kind of, and yeah, I exercise on a regular basis, and I keep to a certain routine. So when I'm traveling all over the place, you know, I have my little routine every morning, which allows me to keep some kind of balance. So those are the little things I think that have helped, but I think knowing families first and getting joy from other people's successes continues to feed me and make it fun. I love the big picture. I really don't want to be involved in a lot of little small things. I don't want to be involved in grant writing and stuff anymore. Even writing articles, I couldn't care less. I let other people do it, and that's fine. They need that in their career. I love keeping my eye on that big picture and on healthcare, on what's happening and what we need, what I think we need to do to be able to do what has to happen in this country to make healthcare viable and sustainable. And so having moved from, you know, smaller things to bigger picture issues, I'm delighted to be involved in some of these larger committees where I figure I can influence policy. So my role has really shifted in that way, from running programs to running departments to really looking at big things like policy and healthcare. Maybe I'm crazy because I'm not sure we can actually influence it, right? But that's what gets me excited, is when suddenly someone says, do you want to sit on this sort of Health Canada thing, that whatever, and I say, sure, because I'm hoping that given the experience that I've had, I can bring something and maybe influence what really will ultimately shift some of our government folks to investing in understanding primarily what we need to do. So that's what keeps me going, as well as continuing to build relationships. I just am building them with different people at this stage.